So, Madam Web is the latest superhero film from Sony's Spider-Man universe without Spider-Man. You know, the one with Venom and who else? Morbius and Craven will be coming soon, but apparently no Spider-Man. Which, you know, I would think, I would like to say that, you don't need Spider-Man to do these villains, right? I would like to say that, because you're not bound by that comic book lore, you could do something more interesting with it. Which is weird because, the way that, Madam Web has pretty much proceeded the exact same way that Morbius has. Which is that it feels like a film that is distant from, the Marvel Cinematic Universe and allowed to kind of, be its own thing. And yet, it just feels like a bland, stale superhero film with a character, with a protagonist who's gifted, these incredible powers, but doesn't seem all that interested in them. At least that's not the tone that comes across here. Because, watching, Morbius go from, this guy who had a debilitating disease, who could barely move, and then finds, this vampire power, and is able to become super agile, and he can fly and do all this cool stuff, and he just seems bored with it all. And that's very much the case with Madam Web. Within Madam Web, you have Dakota Johnson playing Cassie Webb, who is this woman she's a paramedic within New York, and she discovers that she has clairvoyant powers, where she can predict the future. And, again, this could be a fascinating power, but I think the problem is just, before she even discovers these powers, she's kind of a bit of a dull character. Just she has these very bland, dry deliveries and these attempts at humor that just fall flat on their face so many times that by the time where we get to the moment where she discovers she has the ability to see the future, you think, okay, this might be exciting. This might, zap her out of the doldrums of her life, and how she's able to, kind of push aside all her emotions and her past, and the fact that she doesn't really have that great of a relation. Well, her mother died during childbirth, and she kind of blames her mother because she went off to the jungle and it's a whole thing. We don't have to get too much into it, but basically she's kind of a boring character. But then she gets these clairvoyant powers. Then you think something more exciting would be happening. She'd be like, "Oh, I could predict the future. This is astounding." It's and you'd expect to have her kind of these shocked reactions, what did I just see, and how can I prevent this, and how do I save these people? Because she eventually learns that there are 3 teenagers who will eventually become a version of Spider-Woman. And this isn't a spoiler, which I'll explain in a moment, but she realizes they're in danger because they're being targeted by Ezekiel, the villain of this film, who is played by Tahar Rahim. And he has a relationship with Cassie's mother, and he also has the same clairvoyant powers as well. Now, here's the biggest problem with this film, is that it doesn't really have all that much excitement for the type of superhero story that it's trying to stage here. In particular, because mostly because remember when I said that the Spider-Woman reveal was the big thing that was going to happen with these 3 teenagers of Maddie, Anya, and Julia, the 3 teenagers who will become the Spider-Woman. It's not really a spoiler because it's revealed very, very early in the film. Ezekiel has this vision that he's going to be killed by these 3 teenagers, and he thinks, I got to kill them first before they kill me in the future. Even though it seems like it's a long way off, he just wants to get ahead of the curve here, which kind of stinks because it's the vision that he has. You see these teenagers in their full Spider-Woman getup, and it's teasing this film that will probably never come, because this is Madam Web is supposed to be set in 2005, I believe, the mid 2000s. So in order for this film to age up to the current Sony Spider-Man free universe, it's going to be 20 years before they get to that age where they could interact with Morbius, unless they just recast, which kind of seems like it's a bad deal for the teenage actresses here of Sydney Sweeney, Isabella Merced, and Celeste O'Connor. Like, kind of a raw deal for them. Like, this is a film where they get to play Spider-Woman, where they're on the poster as Spider-Woman, and they spend a collective time of maybe 30 seconds of future visions where they're in the costumes. And I will give the film this, to the film's credit, at least, you know, for the majority of the film, when they're just kind of trying to fend for their lives and not be killed by Ezekiel and following around Webb throughout all this. They look good. They got like some nice outfits on. They kind of have that attire that seems suitable for like a horror film, which got me kind of excited because they kind of like that little bit of like that kind of like slash, like they kind of look like characters from like a slasher film, and that kind of got me a little bit excited because, you know, Ezekiel's targeting these kids. So he's going to be coming after to kill them. So, you know, maybe you might have a little bit of a happy death day to you type of vibe here. And, this was kind of like the thing I was kind of hoping for with Morbius, where it's like, oh, maybe they could make it like a slasher horror film and have Webb trying to come to save the day, but, you know, being terrified that she might not be able to save everyone, which keeps witnessing these slashings and these teenagers being brutally murdered. And it's like, that could actually be a really cool angle if the film had some faith to make it that. Instead, it becomes like a very much a first draft type of like superhero film where there's so much unaccounted for information that really becomes distracting when it really shouldn't. Like the film should be good enough where I'm not paying attention to stuff like, wait, Cassie's still driving around in a taxi she stole while the police are looking for her. I shouldn't be questioning that. I should be more excited about like the chase she has with Ezekiel when she comes to save the teenagers, but I can't because the acting is poor and like the writing is bizarre. Like at one point, like there are several points in the film in which Cassie will just abandon the three teenagers so that she can go learn more about her mother and her powers. I mean, and I understand like that's a concern for her, but like her grand plan to like, you know, go back to her apartment while she's on the lam to find out some more information about her powers is to leave the three teenagers alone in the woods with no like tent or food or any means to keep themselves alive. And immediately after she does that, before she leaves, like she just leaves the teenagers there. She just like shouts back to them twice, "Hey, don't do anything stupid," which is kind of funny when you realize in that moment she's doing the stupidest thing she could do, which is like, if you want to protect these three teenagers, the worst thing you could do is leave them alone in the woods with no supplies and nothing to defend themselves with. And on that level, I don't want to create a false impression here, because if I describe the film that way, it makes it sound like it's so bad it's good, but it's not. It's just as boring and dull and flavorless as Morbius was. And I feel like some people are going to try to play that up with Madam Web, because like I know that Sony for a time tried to play Morbius up as like, oh, it's so bad that it's so good. We're gonna, because they had those memes about it's Morbin time, so now we're gonna shove it back in the theaters and see how well it does. Maybe it's gonna be so bad it'll be a great midnight hit, and it didn't, because it was bland and dumb, and the people who were the people who were embracing the memes obviously hadn't seen the film, or they had no interest in going back to watch it, because there was nothing all that interesting about the film. And the same with Madam Web. Like the performances are kind of bland. Like I will give some credit to Sydney Sweeney, Isabella Merced, and Celeste O'Connor. They're all right. They're given just enough time to have some character here, but Johnson is just kind of flat in this film. She's so dead with her deliveries, and I can only imagine like that she was probably instructed to kind of act this way, like hoping that the humor would be more organic, where she's not trying too hard for laughs. But even the scenes where it is clear like they're trying to make a joke, it does not land at all. It's just like, oh god, this is not working so much. Not to mention, like, you know, her powers are kind of bizarre. The editing's all over the place. Like I said, there's because of the clairvoyant visions, we're given all the information early about the clairvoyant powers. Not to mention the history of Cassie's mother. So Cassie grows up hating her mother because she thinks that, there was no purpose to her going out to the jungle, even though we're let in on it early, what went down in there. So most of the film, you're just kind of watching all the rest of the characters play catch up. And it's kind of dull because there's no aspect of surprise to it where you fully get engaged with it. So like, I know that there are some people who are trying to promote this film as being so bad that it's funny, and it really isn't. Like, it's just it was bland as Morbius. I will give it credit. It was more like visually appealing to watch. Like I said, I like the look of the teenagers kind of having a little bit of a slasher vibe. There's a little bit of playfulness with like the clairvoyance, but not as much as I feel like they could be. And they're a little bit like wishy-washy on the aspects of the powers. Not to mention they try to crack a few jokes about it at a few points, and they don't land here. Not to mention, you have Adam Scott in this film, who feels like he should be like, comedic backup, and he can't do anything in this film. He can't bring that much comedy to it. Like, he's trying to have like kind of like a little bit of a dry wit to him, but and there are a few scenes where it's like you could kind of get used to him as a character if he had a few more scenes with him. But when you compare his dry wit to Johnson's dry delivery, it's just like, oh, this is not working here. Not to mention all the technicalities of like the ADR is so poor in this film, where it's like you could tell like at the last minute they were like forcing in some extra dialogue into the soundtrack just because I felt like they didn't, probably because they didn't have enough faith in the audience for certain scenes to read out the information that was being shown to them. It feels like a mess, like a film that's been retooled to hell and back, made into more of a corporate product, which becomes a lot more apparent with like the blatant promotion of Pepsi in this film. Like, this is on a level that I hadn't seen since like Michael Bay, where like there's a scene where early on where Johnson's at a party and she's holding a Pepsi can, but she's holding it in such a weird way that like her fingers are like, she's holding it kind of like this to make sure that her fingers are not covering up the Pepsi logo so that you can see the Pepsi, clearly that it's a Pepsi in every single scene that she's holding the can. Not to mention later on, the Grand Showdown has it at a factory in which a giant Pepsi sign crushes the villain. It's like, oh my, this isn't working. This is, oh God, I want this. Like I said, I would like to see, kind of like this horror aspect that was teased a little bit. Maybe have like, like if you're gonna do kind of like, a Happy Death Day to You type thing, do that. If you're gonna make it a Spider-Woman origin story, do that. But it just feels like this bland mishmash of ideas that have been like forced through like the corporate meat churner, and it turns out just this mess of a film. It very much feels like a mid-2000s superhero film, which is very fitting that they set the film in this time frame, because back then it felt like superhero films are all over the place, trying to figure out what works, and we're just kind of like shooting around in the dark, trying to make a film that audiences would accept, but also trying not to make it look too comic booky while still having comic book aspects of it. And unfortunately, it just doesn't work. It's the worst kind of bad movie. It's a bad movie that is not funny enough, not bizarre enough to be enjoyable the way that I'm sure like Sony and a few other people are going to be trying to promote it. It's just like a bland and messy Marvel movie that just doesn't work. Once again, proving that this Spider-Man free Spider-Man universe is just not working. I don't know whether it's just the corporate choices or the executive meddling or the how much control the directors have, but this is just not working, and it's definitely not making me excited for the Craven film and to see where that fits into this universe. So yeah, Madam Web is a mess.